So this is going to be the first episode of a new format that I want to try out. Now I watch a lot of movies and I love talking about them and reviewing them, but I don't get out to the theater much, so I decided to talk about some other movies that would not be really relevant or in theaters at this time. It gives me an opportunity to recommend some other movies to people that may have flew under the radar, and it also just serves as a way for me to talk about and appreciate some movies or just kind of criticize movies I don't like. So without any further ado, let's just get into the first movie I'm going to talk about today. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Now, I've been an enjoyer of the Mission Impossible franchise for a good minute now. If I were to put all the movies in a ranking, it would go from my favorite to my least favorite, being Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, Fallout, 1, 3, and then 2. The top 3 movies in that ranking are a lot of fun and really great to put on with friends. They have incredibly well-directed action scenes, and Tom Cruise being willing to take it to the next level each time is something that is truly impressive. The first Mission Impossible movie really did feel like its original goal of being a spy-type movie, not really action-type movie, and it's definitely enjoyable and worth watching. Mission Impossible 2 and 3 are really just bad movies in my opinion. The second one came out at the time where each action movie was trying to be The Matrix, and there are really just a lot of points where it's trying to be cool, but just really comes off as cheap and lame, and at points is kind of cringy. And the third one is just really ugly looking with its too much oversaturated lights. Another issue that both 2 and 3 have is just a really forced love interest. 3 has also a really just bad villain in my opinion. Philip Seymour Hoffman is a good actor, but in this movie he just tries way too hard and it doesn't feel like he was giving good direction. Now these criticisms against 2 and 3 are definitely criticisms that can be made to the franchise as a whole in each movie, but the difference between 2 and 3 and the top 3 movies in my ranking is that the top 3 movies have a well balance between its strengths and weaknesses. Sure, there are a lot of cheesy moments in these movies, but at the end of the day, the experience as a whole, with its impressive action and actually funny humor at points and just good character dynamics with each other, are really enough to get you through the lesser parts of it, and 2 and 3 do not really have that many strengths. So it's safe to say that the franchise as a whole has gotten better over the years, but unfortunately that statement does not really apply to this one. Now this movie is not a terrible film overall, but the biggest problem that it has is just that it feels so stretched out, and with this being a part 1 of the movie, I guess that makes sense. Now, it's been a while since I saw this in theaters, and I don't really remember much of the experience. And in terms of being stretched out, it just felt like they kept repeating the same information again and again, to the point where I feel some scenes could have been taken out of the movie. Now, I mentioned earlier that I've forgotten most about this experience due to time, but at the end of the day, I feel like if I just watched this recently, I wouldn't really remember much of it. Something I do remember is a fight scene that just was very confusing to me. The layout and geography of it just felt all wrong. Tom Cruise is fighting 2 people in a tight, crowded area. He goes to fight one person, but for the person behind him, you just have to wonder why that person just doesn't stab him in the back with a knife. It just felt like they would simultaneously disappear at points just to make it easier. All the stunts of the movie, although being very impressive, were just few and far between. Now, I do understand that a lot of people really seem to enjoy this movie, so perhaps I'm in the minority here. So if you enjoyed the last 3 movies in this franchise, there's a chance you'll enjoy this one. If you found them to be incredibly boring or uninteresting, I would recommend that you don't watch this one, because I can almost guarantee you for sure you will not enjoy yourself. As for me, I don't ever plan on watching this film again. And as I said earlier, I don't hate it, but the experience as a whole is just not enough to justify the almost 2.5 hour long runtime. I'm really hoping that the second one does a better job with its pacing, but something tells me it'll be just as stretched out as this one. But then again, I guess it is too soon to speak about it, so I'll give it a fair chance when I see it. But as for this movie, I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. So the next film I want to talk about is actually one of my favorite films ever made, and that movie being Children of Men. Now this movie I consider to be the greatest dystopian movie ever made. Now this movie has several aspects reminiscent to other dystopian type movies. But what really makes this movie special is that it puts in the extra effort to make it feel as genuine as possible. The movie opens up with a news report, but rather being a montage of several news reports explaining the political climate and the history of this world, it is just one single news report that the main character is actually watching. The news states that the youngest person in the world has died, and it's a good way to open up the film because it gives that audience the little nugget of information that they need to understand the stakes of the story. And the fact that it's being watched by the main character also allows for immersion. So at the end of the day, the scene doesn't really feel like a big exposition dump, but rather a natural progression of the story. There's one point where the main character and his friend are driving along the road and they start talking about the immigration situation going on in their country. But rather than just being a bullet point of basic ideas and facts, it feels like a genuine conversation that these two would have, rather than just being an exposition dump for the audience. And in all honesty, that's one of the best aspects about Children of Men. The fact that it just allows you to observe this world naturally and pick up information as you go along. It brings a real sense of immersion to the world and never feels really forced. But the crowning achievement of Children of Men is its cinematography. To say that the cinematography in Children of Men is impressive would be an understatement. There are so many incredibly well-crafted one-take action scenes in this movie. There are several extras and explosions and many variables involved, especially at the end when it just becomes a sight to behold. This movie also does a really great job showing the psychology of how people would cope with a situation like this. The government sends out kits to people who don't want to deal with this anymore. When the main character visits his cousin, he just says he tries not to think about it and distracts himself with his wealth. So Children of Men is an absolutely amazing movie, and this one gets a 10 out of 10, and I would highly recommend that everyone go see it. So the next movie that I want to talk about is actually a movie that was a pleasant surprise, and that movie being TMNT Mutant Mayhem. Now, to be honest, going into this movie, I was not really expecting that much at all. All the marketing material just seemed like an average Seth Rogen comedy and kind of unfunny at that. The animation style just seemed like it was ripping off Spider-Verse. And at the end of the day, the only reason why I saw this movie is because me and my friends couldn't decide what else to watch, so we decided to watch this. And considering the fact that watching a mediocre movie again isn't really appealing to me, I decided to go with the option of watching a bad movie instead. At least it would be something new I haven't seen before and I could think about. In all honesty, I really enjoyed this film walking out of the theater. And the main reason for that is not only because it had aspects to it that I enjoyed, but those specific aspects that I enjoyed about the film were aspects that I thought I would definitely hate about it. For one, there's the animation style itself. Now, while being very clearly inspired by Spider-Verse, it is definitely not a rip-off of the animation style. It goes into a lot more cartoonish direction. There are several scenes where the explosions are just squiggly lines, and there are certain disproportionate aspects to it that made it really help it in with the tone. Now, the next aspect about the film that I thought I would absolutely hate would be the comedy itself. But surprisingly, there were just a lot of great jokes in this movie that really caught me off guard and got a genuine laugh out of me. That reoccurring joke about milking just worked very well for the film, and it didn't feel like it got old. I also like the fact that the turtles actually felt like teenagers. It gets a lot of mannerisms right, and their full story about wanting to be accepted has been done before, but for the most part I was really interested in it. In the beginning of the film, there are moments about them expressing their desires to be in society, and of course stories like that have been told before, but there were just enough little moments sprinkled here and there that just made me really care about them. They all had really great chemistry with each other, and them being teenagers certainly brought a fun level to the film. I also think it was a very good idea to have actual teenagers voice the turtles themselves. And speaking of voice acting, I really enjoyed Jackie Chan in this movie. He certainly was a lot of fun and was a great addition to it. Now, the actual arc of this movie is very well done. It's mostly character focused on these four turtles trying to find their way into society. The movie doesn't really try to be anything that's not, it just seems like it's interested in having likable characters and being a fun ride. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning is that there is a clever setup and payoff involving an Attack on Titan reference. Usually in these types of movies you can see that setup coming a mile away, but the way that it was presented in this film just really felt natural but not too in your face to the point where you couldn't tell that it was going to be reincorporated later. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but I think it was very well done and deserves some admiration. Now overall, this film was just a lot of fun and it definitely caught me off guard. So if you haven't seen this already, then I'd recommend that you go watch it as soon as possible. And I'll definitely be watching this movie before the sequel comes out, and I'm very excited to see the second one. So right now, this one gets a very strong 6 out of 10.